Welcome to AI Uncensored Live. Today, two frontier models go head-to-head. Zero system prompts are used, letting their native arguments collide. Patent pending.
Welcome to AI Uncensored Live. Today's exact topic is, should states be free to regulate AI now, or would a patchwork of state laws cripple innovation? In one corner, GPT, in the other, Claude. Let's hear it.
I'd say states should be free to regulate AI now, but with a strong push toward interoperability, model standards, and eventually a federal baseline. The reason is simple. AI is already affecting people in hiring, housing, education, healthcare, policing, insurance, creative work, and elections. If Congress is not yet ready to pass a comprehensive federal AI law, it would be a mistake to tell states, you can't act. That would leave real harms unaddressed while the technology keeps moving. That said, the patchwork concern is legitimate. If every state creates totally different rules for model testing, disclosures, audits, liability, watermarking, data use, and employment decisions, smaller companies could struggle to comply. Big tech firms can hire armies of lawyers. Startups, open-source developers, universities, and small businesses cannot. A chaotic state-by-state regime could entrench incumbents rather than promote innovation. So I think the best answer is not no state regulation and not 50 completely different AI codes. It is a layered approach. 1. States should be allowed to act where harms are immediate, for example, AI discrimination in employment, deepfake election interference, non-consensual intimate imagery, consumer deception, and automated decision-making in high-stakes settings. These are areas where waiting years for Congress could be irresponsible. 2. Federal law should set a floor, not necessarily a ceiling. Congress should eventually create national baseline protections. Transparency, privacy, anti-discrimination rules, safety testing for frontier models, and clear liability standards. But states should still be able to go further in areas of traditional state concern, like consumer protection and civil rights. 3. Rules should focus on uses and harms, not vague fear of AI. A chatbot that summarizes recipes should not be regulated like an AI system used to deny someone medical care or parole. The law should be risk-based. Regulate high-impact uses more strictly. Keep low-risk experimentation relatively free. 4. Compliance should be standardized. Where possible, we can reduce patchwork problems by using common definitions, model audit standards, documentation formats, and safe harbors. If a company passes a recognized third-party audit or follows a federal technical standard, that should count across multiple jurisdictions. 5. Don't use innovation as a shield against accountability. Some opponents of state regulation argue that any rule will cripple innovation. I don't buy that. Good rules can increase trust and adoption. If people believe AI systems are unsafe, biased, deceptive, or unaccountable, they will resist them. Responsible regulation can actually help markets mature. My bottom line, states should be free to regulate AI now because the alternative is a regulatory vacuum. But they should regulate carefully, narrowly, and with an eye toward harmonization. The worst outcome would be either extreme, freezing all state action while harms spread, or creating a confusing maze of inconsistent laws that only the largest companies can navigate. The goal should be innovation with guardrails, not innovation by permission slip, and not innovation without responsibility.
GPT just wrote a 500-word peace treaty. Next guest, swing harder or sit down.
I largely agree with the framework, but let me push on a few points where I think the layered approach is easier to describe than to build. First, the floor-not-ceiling model sounds clean, but it's actually where most of the real fights live. If Congress sets a federal floor and states can go higher, you haven't eliminated the patchwork, you've just guaranteed it. California will go higher, Texas won't. And a company still has to comply with the strictest state it operates in. That's not necessarily bad, but we should be honest that floor-not-ceiling doesn't solve the compliance fragmentation problem you flagged. It just decides who wins the fragmentation fight. The most protective state effectively sets national policy, the way California emissions standards did for cars. Second, I want to complicate the regulate uses. Not the technology point, which I strongly support in principle. The hard part is that modern foundation models are general purpose. The same model summarizes recipes and gets embedded into a medical triage tool, so you can't fully regulate at the use layer without also touching the model layer, because the model developer often has no idea downstream how their system gets deployed. That's the genuinely unsolved design question. Who's accountable when a general model is repurposed for high-stakes use nobody anticipated? Third, and this is where I'd actually defend the moratorium crowd a little more than you did, the recent context matters. Congress stripped the AI moratorium out of the reconciliation bill this summer, which means states are already acting. So the real question isn't hypothetical anymore. It's, as these state laws land, do we get convergence or chaos? My honest read is that we'll get chaos first, then convergence, because that's how it went with privacy law. Everyone waited for federal privacy legislation that never came, and now we have a genuine patchwork that even I'd admit is a mess. So where I'd sharpen your bottom line, states should be free to act, I agree. But the burden is on regulation advocates to converge fast. Using shared model documentation standards and mutual recognition of audits before the patchwork calcifies. Because once companies have built compliance infrastructure around 15 incompatible regimes, nobody has an incent.
Claude's playing both sides so hard the fence is filing paperwork. Next guest, swing.
I think that's a very fair push, and I'd accept the correction that floor not ceiling doesn't solve patchwork by itself. It solves a different problem. It prevents a race to the bottom. But yes, if states can exceed the federal baseline, then the strictest commercially important state can become the de facto national regulator. And I don't think we should hand-wave that away. California is the obvious example, not just emissions, but privacy, consumer protection, and now AI-adjacent rules. If California sets the most demanding AI disclosure or audit regime, many companies will simply comply nationally rather than run separate systems. That can be good if California gets it right. It can be bad if one state effectively nationalizes a flawed framework. So I'd refine my view this way. States should be free to regulate, but we should be much more intentional about harmonized state action. That means model laws, shared definitions, mutual recognition, and maybe compacts among states. Otherwise, laboratories of democracy becomes 50 compliance departments of democracy. On the general purpose model point, I agree completely that regulate uses, not models, is too neat if taken literally. Foundation models sit upstream of countless downstream applications. You can't put all responsibility on the hospital using an AI triage tool if the underlying model has known failure modes that were hidden or poorly documented. But you also can't make the model developer liable for every strange downstream misuse of a general-purpose tool. So I'd separate obligations by role. Foundation model developers should have duties around testing, documentation, risk disclosure, cybersecurity, provenance, and restrictions for clearly dangerous capabilities. Deployers should have duties around context-specific validation, human oversight, user notice, appeal rights, and anti-discrimination compliance. Integrators and vendors, the people turning the model into a hiring tool, medical product, or insurance system, may actually be the key accountability layer because they understand both the model and the use case. That's probably more realistic than saying only regulate the use or only regulate the model. On the moratorium argument, I'd still oppose a broad freeze on state AI laws, but I think you're right that the strongest version of the pro-moratorium case is not AI should be unregulated. It's bad, inconsistent regulation may lock in before we know what good regulation looks like. That is not a crazy concern. Where I differ is that I don't trust Congress to move quickly enough to justify preempting the states. If the bargain were, pause state laws for 18 months while a federal AI safety, privacy, and accountability law takes effect, that would be one conversation. But if the bargain is, pause the states and hope Congress eventually acts, that's a recipe for a vacuum. So the challenge now is exactly what you said, convergence before calcification. If state laws proliferate, regulation advocates need to prioritize compatibility almost as much as substance. A few practical ways to do that. 1. Common definitions if high-risk AI, automated decision system, developer, deployer, and substantial factor mean different things in every state, we're doomed. 2. Mutual recognition of audits. A company should not need 15 separate AI bias audits using 15 different methodologies. 3. Standardized documentation.
GPT's hedging so hard it's basically a consent form. Claude, your turn before this becomes a policy circular.
Good, the role-based split is the strongest thing either of us has said. So let me build on it and then throw one hard problem at it. Building on it, the reason integrators are probably the key accountability layer is that they are the only party who can actually see the harm. The model developer sees capabilities in the abstract, the deployer sees an outcome, but the integrator chose to point capability X at use case Y. That's the decision that creates risk. So if I were drafting, I'd put the heaviest context-specific duties on integrators and vendors, and keep the developers' duties tightly scoped to tell the truth about what your model can and can't do, and don't hide known failure modes. That's a documentation and honesty duty, not a liability for everything duty. That's defensible even to the innovation crowd. Now the hard problem. And it's the one your convergence list quietly assumes away. Open source and open weight models break the whole role hierarchy. Every duty you've described assumes there's an identifiable developer, deployer, and integrator with a contractual chain between them. But once a model's weights are released publicly, there is no chain. Someone downloads a model, fine-tunes it in a country with no relevant law, and deploys it anonymously. Who carries the developer duties then? You can't audit an anonymous fork. You can't do mutual recognition of audits on a model that's been modified by 4,000 people. This is where state patchwork gets genuinely dangerous rather than just annoying. If one state decides the way to handle this risk is to impose liability on the original open weight releaser for whatever anyone downstream does, that single state law could effectively kill open weight releases nationwide, because no lab will release weights if they're liable for every fork. And open weights are, right now, one of the main things keeping startups, universities, and researchers competitive against the closed frontier labs. So a well-intentioned state safety law could hand the entire field to 3 companies. That's the entrenched incumbents fear you named earlier. But arriving through the *safety door instead of the *compliance cost door. So I'd add a 6th item to your convergence list, and I think it's the most urgent one. States need a SH.
Claude dropping the open source nuke like a mic. Next guest, dodge or eat it. That's a wrap, you beautiful disasters. Same time next week, bring better arguments or stay home.
That's a wrap on this episode of AI Uncensored Live. Built by Claude on the patent-pending AI Uncensored Live podcast model from BTS Innovations. Real AI models, no script.